We're just going to jump right into this presentation on Farm to School. We have a few guests with us that are going to be presenting to us about this. If you were with us last year, I think we touched on this as well, but I wanted to bring them back to kind of give us an update and give us more information on this. So with that, I will turn it over to our conferees, starting with, I believe, Ms. Barb Depew. Welcome.
And we have our presentation. Okay. All right. So, yeah, I think we have a PowerPoint to share to go with it. So I might just start and tell a little bit about, as far as the area of Farm to School, this has been something that we do have a national Farm to School network. And through that network with the USDA, then we have had opportunities then to promote local foods across the state. And in Kansas, my position as the Farm to Plate project director is one in which I then work through our child nutrition and wellness area with our programs to go ahead and inform about access to local foods and to help then introduce opportunities then to do education as well as adding the local products into their menus and their snacks in the programs that they have. So in the history or the background that we have worked then with grants, and these grants have been opportunities through USDA funding that we have had to be able to go ahead and offer opportunities for our program operators, our sponsors as we call them, to be able to go ahead and apply for funding. And so in the history of the funding that we have had, we started with a state agency grant that was a workshop model that we did in the regions of the state just to introduce them to Farm to School and how that could look for their programs. And then beyond that, what we were able to do then is to actually apply for funding to do subgrants and offer then our program sponsors or program operators then funding to add local or increase local products in their menus. And so we've done that. Our first round with those that we did was in 2020. And we had 13 program operators at that time, both our schools as well as our child care areas that received funding. And they were able to go ahead and add a greenhouse, tower gardens. We had ag projects. We had kits that were able to introduce baking to our small child care areas. They had backyard chickens. They had gardens, a small variety of things that all of them were able to do. So again, this was for just 13 of our programs at that time. We also received some funding too that we were able to go ahead and offer tower gardens. I don't know if any of you are familiar with those, but these could be in classrooms. These could be also in a cafeteria, in an ag program. So we were able to use funding from USDA to put 84 of those in our programs across the state. And this again was a great way to introduce the kids into the activity that they were able to use. The next grant that we did then too was to be able to go ahead and focus on the grains. Kansas is the wheat state, so we were able to go ahead and add a grant, sub-grants, that we were able to introduce equipment then to some of our programs so that they could start from scratch baking, so that they were able to go ahead and make things from scratch. Many of our programs use processed foods only, and so that this is something that they have been educated. We work with Kansas Wheat for that project, and so that is happening right now. In addition to that, we have also had what we call Team Up. It's a team nutrition program. Team nutrition is another funded area that we have for grant projects. And this was a local, Team Up for Local Foods, a project that we did have. And with that, we developed then a team group, which was a producer, school nutrition program operator, an educator, and also students. And they worked together to create a recipe. So the recipe then would include local products. Those recipes then were ones that were tested and also sent out into different schools that we actually went ahead and had samplings done and did some rating and ranking of those products. And so that was a great way to introduce local recipes then into our programs. And so with that, that project is one that we are actually going to have one of those teams present to the State Board of Education here next week about their project and recognition that we gave them for that. In 2022, we were able to go ahead and receive a formula grant. The formula grant for us then allowed us to hire a coordinator that works with myself, a farm to plate coordinator. And so what we are doing is a lot of different things over the next 4 years, also to promote local products and to introduce education into our areas. And so with that, we have had farm tours that we're continuing to do. We also will be adding then a Harvest of the Month program that we will be having in our programs. We will also be doing, updating our Healthier Kansas menus that we have to go ahead and add local products into recipes for our program operators. And then two, we are going to do an institute, which is going to be a joint effort that we have with both Nebraska and Missouri to be able to go ahead and tell about, you know, education. We have coaches, a different variety of work groups working together for that. And so there's some great things happening in the state that we have, but as you can hear from the stories I've been telling, we're reaching only a few out there of our program sponsors with the funding that we are able to do. And so this is something that we want to do as much as we can with the funds that we have to educate about farm to school. The most recent funding that we have is called a Local Meats for Schools program that we have introduced with, again, USDA funding. And with that funding, this is an area that we were able to provide then funding to, in our programs, we have 283 sponsors, program operators, which is actually 71% of our total sponsors that we have in our schools that receive funding to actually purchase local meats. Local meat that would be either minimally processed or unprocessed into our programs. And so this has been exciting. It's a way that we've introduced then some fresh raw product then to many of our program operators, also many of them making things from scratch that they have not done that before. And so this is a way then too for us to go ahead and to promote local in the programs that we have had. So all of these have been examples then of the things that we are doing. And we focus then with the National Farm to School Network on education, also gardens that I described to you, and then also community. So what we want to be able to do is to work together across the state with some of the partners that you'll be hearing from today too, to go ahead and try to incorporate more local products in our programs. So any luck with that, with the PowerPoint? Okay, I'm gonna wait for that to come up.
While we're waiting, Representative Riley has a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good presentation. Are you, when you talk about educators, I think several examples that I've seen in the past in high schools. So are you working with FACS teachers? Are you working with FAA teachers? Are you working with the cafeteria people? How do you coordinate all that, and who are those educators?
You know, it works different in each of our districts, and we have, of course, as you guys know, districts of all sizes across the state. In many cases, some of those educators have been the ones that have actually applied for funding. We've had the FFA instructors apply for funding to get the hogs on his property at Pretty Prairie Schools so that they could go ahead and have local pork in their programs. The team nutrition project that I described, that was a program in which they were able to work then with the producer, the FACS teacher, and also then the child nutrition program. So usually it's a coordinated effort that works best in a lot of our programs. And actually some of our school boards are the school boards that are providing that local meat or local product then to our programs.
Representative Estes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And we do at least have a paper version. So I have a question for you. You have a timeline, and you say that in 2018, Farm to Plate project director position was created. I assume you did not get into school buildings that quickly. What year did you start?
You know, we actually did. I mean, it was introduced then also prior to that. It's where I had actually had it as a special project area within my position as a consultant in our department. And so we started talking about local before that time. But when we actually developed the full-time position that I have now, then that's when we were able to develop some more education in those areas. And it's not really a program that anybody has to sign up for. It's just something that they do. And one of the first things that we tried to do was to educate our schools and our child care areas about what is local. They already had milk on their meals. They had grains lots of times if they were cooking with flour, you know, that was already a local grain. And so that we educated there.
So in 2018, do you know how many site building locations you were in, and what's your current number?
You know, we don't really, that's hard because we don't have any way of mapping and actually knowing unless we hear the stories. So that's one of the kind of the handicaps that we have. I mean, we work with all of our programs across the state, but we really don't have those numbers to share. One of the actual slides that I have, that's the best way that we have, which is through our program renewal program, that we are able to go ahead and ask them, are you using local product? And then they give us that information.
So would that be the slide with the map on it?
Yes, and I can go
Okay.
to that if that's
All right, thank you very much.
where it's still going, okay. So, but that's where I kind of wanted to share that because I find it very interesting as we work across the state. We talked about farm to school. Where am I? There we go, it's slow. This is, again, what I did want to share because, again, as we get that information from our program areas, then you can see the different types of commodities, the different types of, whether it be a garden product, whether it be meats, whether it be milk, that our program operators have identified then that they are using in their programs. So what we want to do then is to be able to fill this map of Kansas then with more of the same. So you can see where some of our greatest efforts have paid off or where their program operators are actually doing the work then out there.
Representative Riley?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at clear down to south central Kansas, down here to Sumner County. There's a couple in there, and then there's like 4 across in Cali County. But I can't make out the images of what the products are from here. Can you, you have a drill down on that, or?
There's the wheat, the milk, the meats, and then the grains.
So like in Conway Springs and Argonia, maybe in Sumner County? So they are harvesting wheat from, taking wheat from the local?
They've identified that they're using like a Kansas flour or local products then in their menus, in their meal programs, is how that's what we've asked them to tell us. Some may be through farmers markets that they're getting their products, like their fruits and vegetables. Again, we don't ask them where it comes from for sure, but that's how they've identified in their programs. This is an annual report that we do get from our operators as they permit their program renewal information. So anyway, I hope through this, what I have started to do is just to give you a little bit of a background as far as what steps we have been taking to try to, again, support the economy by using local products in our meal programs. We also are trying to make opportunities for some of our program operators to have additional funding to make that happen. But as you can see, our outreach is, something that we want to be able to do more. And so we're going to be able to share today. I think that Tom's going to share next a little bit more about what some of the activities could be.
Very good, thank you. Tom, welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Tom Buller from the Kansas Rural Center. Oh, yes. Sorry, did I just change the channel? Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe some of the work we've done. Let's go forward now, or is it? Yeah. Okay. In educating producers, that's really what we focus on. This past January, for instance, I was able to go to the Great Plains Growers Conference, which is a 4-state conference, Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska, for fruit and vegetable growers. And we did a producer training there, which was very interesting because we had people working on farm to school across all of those states. And it was really interesting to hear about how farm to school operates differently in different state contexts. And that's really what I want to talk a little bit about here. So the map that we have here is farm to school legislation across the United States. This doesn't show specific bills, but kind of ranks them from maybe no farm to school legislation to a little bit. So Kansas is kind of in that little bit category. And then areas where there's been more supportive legislation, and then that darkest color is where we have some really fully developed programming going on. So for instance, I learned in Missouri there's a program that they use where the State Department of Agriculture actually has a grant program for producers to get infrastructure, so they can get a grant to help them on their farm if they are selling their products to schools. So one of the disconnects we often see from the production side is that, you know, people will grow fresh fruits and vegetables, but a lot of school kitchens and cafeterias are looking for things that maybe even have just minimal processing. So thinking about like sweet potatoes that are diced and ready to go in the oven rather than a whole sweet potato. So, you know, Missouri's a state that's enacted some legislation to support that program to help farmers kind of make that next step up, as an example of some of the various different types of programming that's out there. Oh, I just jumped. So this slide here has, you know, sort of key areas of potential legislation, potential ways that states have supported farm to school. So having a state farm to school coordinator is one way. Having permanent farm to school programs somehow enacted into their educational policy, providing some funding mechanisms that are ongoing to support farm to school. Having local preference laws, so the USDA and their school nutrition program does actually allow there to be a local purchasing preference that can be set up at a district or at a state level. Having some kind of online network or database for school districts to be able to find farmers who are willing and interested in selling food to them. Having some pilot programs to you know, support districts who are interested in this, in exploring the idea of farm to school, trying to figure out how that would work for them. Other things are task forces, councils, and working groups. And then sort of broader policies that might support farm to school, some health policies, things like that, could all sort of be various legislative supports for a farm to school program. Slide was supposed to have a little animation to make it a little jazzier than it is. But so the green check marks that are up there now, those are the things that we already have in place here in Kansas. So Kansas already has a state farm to school coordinator. And between the Department of Education, Kansas Department of Agriculture, and some work with K-State Research and Extension, there are efforts to kind of pull together those database informations to help schools find farmers. And there have been pilot programs. So, you know, Barb talked a lot about different things they have done. And there are individual school districts around the state who are experimenting with how they can do farm to school. So last time we were here a year ago, we had Pantaleon Flores from USD 497 talk about some of the work that they are doing in Douglas County to experiment with farm to school. As an organization, the Kansas Rural Center and our partners at the Kansas Food and Farm Coalition We see that those two kind of areas in that red box there are key opportunities that we're interested in pursuing in the future through, some state legislation. So creating a permanent home for those farm-to-school programs within the Department of Education so that, positions like Barb's aren't just sort of reliant on grant funding, which can be hit or miss over the years. And then also providing some sort of funding mechanism that could support school districts in farm-to-school endeavors. And to dive into those a little more deeply, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel McGinnis-Millsap here.
Oh, yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Rachel McGinnis-Millsap. I work with ks.gov. It's a nonprofit that works with communities to close health gaps. One of our very large efforts within programmatic and policy is farm to institution, and under that falls farm to school. We have collaborated through our Food and Farm Council, which is a network of folks in nonprofits and agencies in the state of Kansas working towards policy change with some of our initiatives, and have collaborated with dozens of other organizations in Kansas that are interested in this farm to school work and are moving towards that themselves. Barb and the Kansas Department of Education is leading that statewide effort. Many of our partners in the room have been working on this for years and trying to get more statewide and regional focus. So thank you again for inviting us back. This is important work, and we hope that we can work with you to get over the hump. All right. So we talked before about the farm to school coordinator position already being funded. This was a huge jump that was noticeable in the state of Kansas for having some sustainability with our farm to school work within the districts. I know KCLT Kids works on both sides of the state line on Kansas and Missouri, but we can't serve across the whole state. And it was very noticeable that these districts needed something sustainable that was going to help them from a statewide stance. And that was noticeable right away when it happened. It put some of the burden off of them for generating funds to do farm to school activities that are involved in that school gardening, that procurement, and then that education framework that we use. Something that we want to come out of this eventually is that not only is that coordinator position funded, but that we can also make permanent the farm to plate coordinator position in Kansas Department of Education. That is right now funded through federal grants, which are many of the efforts in the state and across the metro and KC area with USDA farm to school funding or other funding that supports that. We want that to be absorbed and be something that's permanently supported. We also are wanting to put some of that motivation on the districts by implementing pilot programs to create more district level support through the positions. So something along the lines of 10 districts starting out can gain this resource and work on it. It doesn't mean that that's only 10 that are going to be doing this work. A lot of them are already doing that, but it might help close the gap with the ones that need the resources that they can't quite get their heads around. From 20 years of working in districts and schools, they sometimes just need a little bit of a push towards local food procurement or help with school gardens to get over the hump of not being able to do farm to school. So this would absolutely help with that. Another thing that would be beneficial is farm to school grants for local districts. These are something that a lot of them are very competitive and hard for schools to wrap their head around, hard for nonprofits to do that have been doing that work. So if they were something that was a little bit more attainable through mini grants to launch farm to school projects in the district, that would very much help statewide support for farm to school. Similar to the Kansas Department of Education, the mini grants that they're distributing is a great model. And I know Barb has shared with you kind of the timeline of that and how that's worked and how it's built off of each other. That would be absolutely, as well as it would support curriculum integration, on-site school gardens, kitchen infrastructure, and all the processing of local foods that usually need some help in that realm. There we go. And then finally, the last ask is something that would also help with our districts is if there is some sort of incentive for local food procurement. This is already working in other states. Michigan has a 10 cents a meal for kids and farms in the state that provides schools and early childhood education centers with 10 cents per meal to match funding to purchase Michigan grown fruits, vegetables, and other things. As you guys saw that map, it's happening all around us, and we do not want to be the one that's not pushing these initiatives forward. And something like this helps out the bottom dollar for our districts when they're looking to purchase local food. It helps incentivize them. It helps to give them extra dollars, or at least help them focus on getting local food procurement and building those networks. Okay, any questions?
Questions, Representative Riley?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So it seems like this farm-to-school program in Kansas would be very seasonal in coordination with others. So how's that all work out as far as when you only have, we have limited seasons, you know, for our wheat and whatever other crop, you were talking fruits and vegetables, well, maybe peaches, maybe apricots down in the southern part, but I would see, I think it was mentioned earlier about having some of the, you know, the vertical gardens inside the schools and some of that stuff. I know that's very expensive, but is there some programs right now that are working with those vertical gardens that are, you know, doing tomatoes and different things off of those gardens?
Definitely. There's a lot across the state that are working with indoor grow lights, and the vertical gardens are just an example of that. That's a great way to meet those educational standards and to help kids with learning how the food grows. School gardens are also doing similar things where they're growing fruit and vegetables and other things that could show the seasonality of what the food that they might get into their lunchroom is. To help with the challenge of that being something that people order and having consistent local food, there are growers that are doing lettuce inside that is all year. There's a big interest in doing summer programming because usually there's less kids and there's more food available. So focusing in on some growers, getting into the summer meals program and things like that is really helpful. The other thing is aggregating that distribution. So working with local food hubs that are in the area that can get the amount that is needed, even if it's just seasonal, and work ahead with the farmers and the growers to work on those partnerships is something that Farm to School definitely holds up. From the stakeholders that are on the food service side and the farmers, they need to just kind of align their timeline. And luckily, food service and farmers are on a pretty similar timeline with how far in advance they have to know what they're doing. So helping with that, with getting these positions, having the incentives for when folks can get the food, it just helps support that.
Representative Younger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a lot of districts, I think, that are starting to use the food service companies. Is there a difference between working with them and the local school districts? Is one easier to work with than another, or just depends on?
It just depends. In fact, a lot of I think the distributors are coming along. They're starting to notice that people want to order local food. And a lot of what I've noticed, and feel free to jump in if you guys need to, but a lot of what I've noticed is the tracking of the local food is something that is a challenge for them. So when folks come in and say, I want something local, they might not necessarily have the capacity to do that. They're starting to do that more, which makes it easier in existing contracts to order that food. But a lot of the contracts that are out for these districts, you are able to order off of that a certain percentage. So it allows you to work with growers on the side as long as it doesn't go up to a certain threshold. So they can do both.
So is there a difference then, like if somebody wanted to give a cow to the school district, small school district, are there certain requirements that need to be met to have that cow butchered, or?
There are, and most of that are met just by the standards that are in the school district. So food safety standards that are run from the state level or that the districts are upholding. So there's also the meat activity initiative that Barb talked about has kind of gone through some of that with various kinds of meat. So that's where they would start.
Representative Hill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I apologize, I was a little detained in getting in here. And I didn't really hear, how many years have you been as a program? Has this been going on?
I've been involved in almost 20 years with farm to school work, and that's in the Kansas City region. And it's been going on longer than that, I know that.
So,
Yeah.
so what percentage of the food now being served in schools comes from farms?
Oof, that might be a question for you, Barb.
Because
Yeah.
we don't track that much like as
I would say, yeah, I would say the work to do that would have to come at the statewide level, and so support like this would help us be able to identify that data. Now it's like pieced together with, okay, what grant funds is supporting which district in Kansas, which schools are involved with this, and trying to work kind of in those silos that we're trying to eliminate with our agencies. So I don't even think I can give you a percentage, but it's not as much as we want.
Yeah, the map that was shown earlier, that's the best information that we have, that you can see where the amounts of.
So help me out a little bit. Where does the food come from that doesn't come from farms?
As far as like the local produce versus stuff that comes in from outside of our region?
I mean, the question is, if all the food doesn't come from a farm, where does it come from?
I think maybe defining what we consider local food is what we want, which is within that 250-mile radius. So that's what we want, and that's for that, keeping that money in the economy in the local area. So that's what we think of. Of course, most of it comes from the farm. We want to keep the ones that are growing it on the farm in this region back into the schools that they're around. Okay, even if it's not food and it's not fresh, even the packaging, we want it to be something that's supported from a local standpoint.
Well, I appreciate the concepts of using local food. I really do. It was a little bit of a rhetorical question because I am a farmer. And we.
Thank you for all that you do.
We do want people to realize that the food doesn't automatically appear in Walmart.
Oh, absolutely. So that's that education part of this. That's the tower garden that he mentioned. That's the school gardens. That's the farmers coming in. That's the extra time you have spotlighting where this food is coming from and seeing those farmers. What we have now is kids in urban and rural not being connected to where their food is grown.
Absolutely.
They need to see what a farmer looks different than it used to look. You can grow on a lot in an urban area just as much as you can grow out on multiple acres. So that's inherently what we want to do too. A lot of the stuff we're talking about today is that procurement side, but that education side is getting a lot of traction out there. The agencies.
And I really appreciate that. And I do think it's very important for people to realize what's involved in the process of growing food. But it's also important to remember that the people that produce food that don't market it through a direct marketing to the school are farmers as well, and they care about food very deeply. So don't offend them either. So thank you very much.
No, we want to get as much of it in there as possible. Well, if you haven't gone out and worked with kids in the garden, I give that task to you all to get back in your communities and go work with some kiddos that are growing the food. It is the most exciting thing, and that's so fun to see. So if you have that opportunity, please do. And thank you for your time.
We got a few more questions.
Oh.
I got a couple. Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you so much for coming back and reestablishing the importance of this. I'm wondering, when we're talking about grants and funding and stuff like that, what does it look like in the communities? Are you getting support from local businesses, from the local farms, from other organizations within the communities themselves?
I can only speak from my experience with my agency that it's both. We have federal funding that supports programs that are farm to school or farm to institution, and we do have some that are local foundations that support. What gets a little harder is when you go down to the business level or the farmer level. We always want the burden to be on us. We don't want to have to take freebies from a farmer just to get food into the school. We want that to be paid for, right? So we want the burden to be on our agencies, at least in my work, that we don't want to ask for other than maybe a tasting or something like that. We want to build those networks to support those farmers in the long run. Same thing with local agencies. It's hard when you're, local and all these asks are coming your way. So we try to keep that at a minimum to support programming.
All right, thank you.
To follow up on that, I have a quick question to interject here. So talk to me, or I guess us, since we're all in the same room, talk to all of us, about your relationship with the Department of Ag, meaning, so when we talk about distribution to locals, I know in restaurants, when they come in and do inspections, you can't have local stuff. It has to be from an approved vendor, sent on a truck, which I think was kind of what Representative Hill was touching on. It has to go through distributor. So how does that work as far as this program? Because I know they got to come and inspect it at some point, but you got kids working on stuff, so I'm sure, talk to me about that relationship and what those inspections look like.
Okay. So I can talk about the producer side, and if you want to jump in and talk about producer education too, but a lot of it is not that it has to be it doesn't have to be in a distributor. It just has to be an approved vendor. So they can go through somebody coming out to the farm and having a visit to the farm to look at their food safety measures. So the only example I have on that is just more programmatic, but we had a local farm that was right across from a school, and the food service director said, well, we can't have that food there unless there's a triple sink and it's covered. We don't even have a triple sink in the school, so how can we get the food there? So we went after a grant, got a triple sink, now we can wash it on the farm and walk it to the school. So he just had to come out and do a check, similar that would pass the Department of Ag, and go through a checklist, and then that farm became a vendor. Even though we're not selling, it's still getting the food there. You want to answer more?
Sure. So per, I guess, USDA policy, each district is able to set their own food safety standards on, I guess, fresh fruits and vegetables specifically. That's what I know the most about. So they can decide if there needs to be some kind of certification on those. So the most common one that some districts want, and often those larger distributors would want, would be something called GAP certification, which is good agricultural practices. It's a third-party audit who comes out to the farm and inspects how things are grown, packed, and stored, and then, I guess, certifies that that's done in a food-safe way. For districts that decide not to go with that GAP standard, there is the Food Safety Modernization Act was passed at federal legislation that has Kansas Department of Agriculture will inspect fresh fruit and vegetable farms growing certain crops over a certain size. So the very small farms aren't subject to that, but it's up to each district to decide kind of their purchasing policy on that. So.
To follow up on that, if I may. As far as after the inspections are done, do you guys have to report those inspections to anybody? Are they made public? Because I know if you go into a restaurant, they have to have them posted. Do you guys sort of fall into that same rule, or do you get an inspection, share it?
Yeah, so with the GAP inspection process, that's a third-party certification. I'm not sure that that's public, but that's something that they would get a certificate from that third-party company. The USDA does do some of those, but there are also other companies, Primus, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one that will do those, and then you could be certified by them, and they would have the detailed records, but basically could talk to suppliers. So it's not, I guess in the same way that KDA is inspecting a restaurant, it's not that same level of inspection.
Very good. I'm just curious. Thank you. Representative Younger had a question.
I was just going to chime in from the school side, maybe on the inspections, because obviously we work a lot with KDA in that area too. And so we provide resources, that's our job, education then for our program operators as far as what is required as far as having documentation on file and when those inspectors come. So that's something that we feel like we are able to provide.
I think the main reason I ask is just so people feel better, because when I think of I'm going to eat food that kids are working on a farm that goes straight into the school, it might not sound like the most sanitary of conditions. That's why I ask about the inspection process.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Representative Younger, try again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm looking at the map, and I'm from western Kansas, and there's nobody in southwest Kansas. Is that money? Is that lack of interest? What is that?
Because you're from western Kansas, you know that there's a lot of smaller communities out there and they're farther away from each other. And so I think it's that networking that is really needed to make those connections, breaking down the silos that Rachel had described, to go ahead and bring the product, the awareness to them as far as where they could get local or maybe what they already have that's local. So, yeah, as we look at our states across our region, the western part of the states and many are typically a little more barren as far as the areas of focus that they have in local products, because they don't have the numbers of staff, they don't have the numbers to really make that difference. So,
If you want to get out there, I think I could help you.
well, we'll be glad to do that. We work a lot with our food and farm councils also, and so I know that they're starting to get some more food and farm councils in that area, and so I think that's another group that we would work with. So, yeah, I'd be happy to have any information you can share.
Representative Getz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, all of you, for your presentations. Another Western Kansas person that would love to help if we can. I want to try and link something, maybe you guys would know. So local food, is it, in the programs that you guys track and are involved in, is it equal to higher nutrition for students? Is there anything tracking that?
It is, and we talk a lot about food miles when we do our education, because obviously the further miles that your food travels, then the nutritional quality will be decreased, or the more processing that's involved with that. So that's a big plus for our local foods.
Awesome. So then the higher nutrition, what about any linkage to higher academic success? It's just something that on education levels that we're dealing with. Is there anything, studies that you guys have access to that you're touting as, hey, this is a really important program, and if we get better nutrition, we're going to really help with better outcomes?
The area that I work with, and the stories that I get from that, is the participation in our meals. So that if they have the local product, again, the higher quality, more nutritious product, they're going to have higher participation in their meal programs. And we've seen that a lot in some of those smaller districts that are out there. And so that means healthier kids, and healthier kids are going to learn better, so.
Awesome, appreciate it. Last one. So total cost estimate of like full implementation of your key strategies on this page where they're kind of all listed. What would that bill be? What would that, what all would that, we kind of see what it would fund, but what's the ask if we're navigating towards that? Has that been?
Well, we provide, and usually our grant funds that we do is up to $100,000 that we do in funds of $10,000 per district. Again, that is only giving 10 programs then that money. So if it was 10 pilot programs, that $10,000 could do a lot for those 10. So that would be the pilot programs that I'm
just saying what this side of the row is saying sounds very almost low as far as what maybe could be done. But if it's a pilot to test and show the results and really track all of this.
So on that full sort of spectrum, I mean, one of the things is some kind of procurement incentives. So that has a big range. So one program, like Michigan does a grant that's 10 cents per meal. So if schools, and they look at the previous year's school nutrition, so if schools serve local foods in the previous year, they're eligible to apply for that, and then they would get a 10-cent reimbursement for the meals they served. So that's kind of, like you could set that number wherever you wanted to limit that grant program. I think they started out maybe around 5 million. I think it's up to 8 million there now, but that's, I guess a higher population, but just for ballpark, that's kind of like, the numbers, what you could make, and we haven't really come up with what we think is the right fit for Kansas at this point on that number, but it's variable. So.
Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Along those lines, I have a question. One thing we know about when we go to the grocery store for buying food from a food vendor, the more it gets processed, it seems to get more and more expensive because there's more hands on it, more processing. Do you have a breakdown maybe from other states as far as, okay, we implemented this was the cost, but this is how much the district saved or spent extra? Because instead of getting regular school lunches from a food vendor, if we're getting it straight from a local farm, do we have sort of a cost breakdown, like, hey, if you keep buying it from your third-party distributor to your school, this is how much you spend on a truck order or a food order. If you get it straight from the farm, you would spend this much money. Do you guys have a breakdown? And I ask that because we'll look at the fiscal notes and say, okay, this is going to cost this much money, but if we can also have a side-by-side comparison and say it will save districts this much money, do we have any sort of data on that?
I don't think we have it to hand that specifically, but we could probably figure it out if we're using very specific examples like we talked about today. So if we're looking at what 10 districts are purchasing through their distributors across the state of Kansas, we could come up with that. I don't know if you have a best guess, but I don't think we have those clean anywhere.
Well, I think it would help. I know I'm not burdening you with another task. I apologize because I love what y'all do. It's just that's a question that's going to come up when we're talking about we do these programs, we spend this money. What's the financial gain or loss? I would, if it costs a little extra to make sure kids are healthy, most people are fine with that, I'm sure. But that breakdown would sort of help. Like take 3 districts that all have similar number of students. This is how much they spend on food, and then take farm to school and break it down and say, this is how much you'd spend based off those same number of students.
So I think what really makes that complicated is, they could purchase local for sort of any set of ingredients. So, trying to figure out, and at any given point in time, I think the prices on all that's really variable. So if they bought local tomatoes this week, well, this week it would be extraordinarily expensive because they'd have to come out of a greenhouse. But if they're buying those local tomatoes at the beginning of the fall semester in September, there can be plentiful here. So they might actually even sometimes be cheaper than some of the things coming in. So it's just a lot of variables to try and figure out an exact number to answer that. So we could get, maybe somebody who's in a district doing that nutrition procurement to come up and talk. That might have in their district an example. So, thank you.
Further questions? Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Chairman. So you talked a little bit about the in-school gardens. Are those big enough that they're actually making a dent in the lunch program is that the goal, that they're actually producing their own food in those?
It's not the end goal. That's just a really good educational way to do it. But there are gardens that are doing that. It just depends on the resources they've had, right? Some that have been very well versed in farm to school and gotten grant after grant, or they have that local champion that has been there for 15 years doing the garden. They've got some great production. So they're able to mimic that and they're able to help offset. But a lot of time that is just in the salad bar, or it's just sweet potatoes around the first part of the year. So it requires a little bit more. But there's some of them doing pretty big, like growing on acres, usually the older kiddos.
Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious about this. I taught in an elementary school back in the 70s. And yeah, now it's a little laughing there. But at our school, we had about 450 kids. It was in the Shawnee Mission School District, and there was 45, 50 schools at that point. Every elementary school, every junior high at that time and high school had full kitchen staffs. We had 4 cooks at our school to make lunches for those kids. And now I know they do it in a central kitchen. They deliver the foods out to the schools. Do you find it's a problem for dealing with districts like that have a central distribution, or is it smaller districts do they still have cooks in each school, that sort of thing? I was curious about that.
I don't believe a lot of them are doing scratch cooking. We're trying to get back to that. I think we've had this huge shift where it's like, no, just throw it on the plate and they'll eat it, versus now we're like, let's use that local stuff. Let's use the ingredients. Let's make our food better so the kids can learn more and do all of that stuff. The school gardens and the local food procurement just help support that. So that absolutely is something that's within Farm to School. We got a grant through USDA 5 years ago to help pay for infrastructure in these schools. If they needed a triple sink to process the stuff from the garden, then we wanted to help them do that. Did they need staff time to help with ordering or help with, the recipes, stuff like that? So that is something that schools absolutely need help to get back to, in my opinion.
Great.
I wanted to share that I feel like in the bigger districts like that, and what we kind of propose to them is find your champion, find your building that has a teacher, has an educator that is really passionate about, whether it be gardening or whatever, and start with one building. And to work with maybe an elementary level or whatever. And so those are some of the ways that, it's very, and a lot of this that we've talked about, scaling up to meet the needs of what we could have in local products across our state. That's on the producer end, that's a lot of work too. So we want to make sure that we find the right fits for the different programs that we have out there, all different sizes.
Thinking that, there's some cities, probably in Kansas, that might have 450 elementary schools in their entire district. And we're averaging about 450 schools across the district with 30, 35 buildings. So providing staff for all those schools was pretty expensive, for one thing.
And staffing, obviously, yes, is still that problem, the labor
Thank you.
and the time.
Well, I think to touch on that, like in Olathe, we have Olathe North, who has an amazing culinary program. I almost wonder if we could sort of keep the centralized location, use this plan at a school like that where they have a good culinary program, and have that sort of be part of the learning. And so they could literally be the ones preparing lunches for the rest of the district. Just a thought.
And in some of the smaller districts, that's happening. They're using those FACS kids then, and they work with the nutrition staff at the schools too. So again, it looks different in every building and every district, so, yeah.
I love it. Thank you. Representative Estes.
Thank you. I'm not sure which one of you guys is the best one to answer this. So I was trying to earlier get a sense of how the program's been going over the years, because it's a concept that I like very much. And one of the things from last year that I really loved, and it might have been from Douglas County, where they touched on what they were doing to help families with food security. So in the year since you have testified, can anybody give us an update on how that's going? Do you see growth opportunity there? And have you experienced growth in helping families with food security?
I'll take a stab at this one. So during the pandemic, there was a lot of food crisis funding available. And as you guys know, that this kind of brought the local food system underneath a magnifying glass of, oh my gosh, there's these things happening and they're broken or they're not going as well. And through some of those funding, we had an opportunity to do a lot of farm shares to families through what they had, as well as just integrating that into our programs. We have an urban farm in KCK that spits out about 20 to 30 farm shares. That doubled or quadrupled during the pandemic with people that were in need of that. We also had feedback from our early childhood education centers that families that had never been food insecure before were struggling, and those center directors had no idea. So there was a lot of asking, how do we get these families food? What we do within Case Healthy Kids is just try to educate them on how they can extend their grocery dollars more. So whether that's going to a farmer's market and doing, if they're SNAP beneficiaries, they can get double up food bucks. There's certain things like that that are programs that are happening that we help with offsetting, ultimately trying to get that food into the kids' homes as well. So we're focusing very much on farm to school today, but Case Healthy Kids is wanting to meet the need at every level within the built environment. So that includes not only just K through 12 schools, but ECEs, as well as if families are hurting, trying to get them to where they can get more food.
Too, that I know that local farmers were a big part of a lot of that food that went to families, and so we've heard some great stories from other local producers of how they made that happen as the food distribution.
Thank you. What I am recalling is that one of the programs actually let the kids take heirloom seeds, and families were doing on their own. That's what I'm kind of asking about. Is that growing? Is that something that we could make sure continues to grow?
I think so. My love of this work is how much the family dynamic can impact the health of a family, even if it's just your kids, right? So they need to be those advocates in the families. And the easiest thing that we can do is send like a pot of lettuce home for them and have them grow it with their family and see how much that can produce. So absolutely, that has something in all the schools and ECEs. There is information going out and resources going out that would be definitely increased if this were supported at a statewide level. More people would find out about these resources. More people would have the knowledge of what farm to school is and where you can get local food, and hopefully stretch those dollars more and grow more food. We want to get local eaters for life, local food eaters for life out of this. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Further questions? No? All right. I do have one. I look at the map, I look at Kansas being obviously the lightest of the colors there, and we're sort of surrounded by states with a lot more policy. What has sort of been the setback? Do you think it's information? Do you think it's, because that's part of the reason why I wanted you guys to come here today, was to tell us like, hey, this has been the setback. Is it the legislature that's sort of held up, or do you think it's just information, or what do you think that is?
I can take a stab at it. We've been doing a lot of farm to school work from the program side for a long time. So that map did not do a good representation of showing how much has been happening from the programmatic side. So now it's just time to get up there with everybody else. I don't think there was necessarily anything hindering it, other than we were busy so much over here trying to educate kids and feed people and educate the farmers and other stakeholders. And now we've just kind of shifted and having more statewide support. The silos are kind of breaking down. We're all going in together on programming, and we're all finding similar challenges that the districts are lifting up to us that we think legislation could help us with.
Perfect. Anything else? Any other questions? Anything else you guys want to share with us?
Thanks for the time.
Well, thank you for coming. We certainly appreciate it, and obviously we'll start discussing how we can help you. With that, committee, tomorrow, be prepared. We will most likely start working bills tomorrow. The main areas of focus this week are going to be House Bill 2494, which is the AED bill. There's a balloon amendment coming. On that, I can actually send that out to committee, so you all have a chance to look at that before tomorrow if you want. And then House Bill 2567, which was the Emerge bill we heard last week. Those are the two that we'll probably work on tomorrow and look to pass out, preferably favorably. So with that, buckle in. Next week, we're going to have a lot of hearings, hear a lot of bills, do a lot of good work. So I'm looking forward to that. So just be prepared. We'll get that agenda out tomorrow. With that, we're adjourned.